There we go.
Hey, hey everybody. Welcome to Game Audio Hour episode 116. Yeah, that's right. This is the Game Audio Hour, a weekly podcast where we discuss all things game audio, from creative ideas to the latest techniques, project experiences to audio secrets. Here is where you'll find in-depth coverage and opinions related to game audio. That's in addition to me and you, Mike. Hey Mike, how are you doing? To audio secrets.
I'm doing well. I think I'm at fault for that weird delay effect we were hearing. I think I had a YouTube window open, so that's gone, and hopefully we will only hear one voice at a time. Aside from that little technical excitement, I'm doing just fine. Had a
Yeah.
little rain, which is nice because it kind of cleans the foot-tall layer of dust that covers the San Fernando Valley. So a little bit of variety weather is always welcome.
Yeah, that's pretty useful. I really appreciated it clearing away the foot tall layer of dust on my car this morning. Hey, I don't have to wash my car for a while. I'll take that. I appreciate some variety. There's actually been a lot of really interesting things that have been changing up, not just the SoCal weather, but actually the video game landscape lately. Do you have a PlayStation VR?
I do not. It's a fairly new arrival on the market, and I'm kind of waiting to see how the first salvo in the competing VR platform wars settle down to see if a favored victor emerges before plopping down my credit card, because things seem very nascent right now. Everyone's kind of oohing and ahhing and trying to figure out which platform seems the most promising. How about yourself?
I I really want to enjoy some PlayStation VR. First of all, I really want to get into the VR world. It's kind of tough for me since I have a great computer that is dedicated for audio, which means I don't have an awesome video card on it. And if you know much about VR, you know you need a whole lot of graphics power for it. I was looking at PlayStation VR because I do already have a PlayStation 4, and the PlayStation VR at only, what, 300, $400 would be the cheapest way to get into VR, and I wouldn't have to spend another 400 or so bucks on upgrading the video card in my machine. So I figured maybe that's a good way to go. But then there's also this weird stuff on the Sony horizon with next month's PlayStation Pro. So Sony is going to be introducing a slightly more powerful version of the PlayStation 4, and I'm not sure what to think about that. They say that it's not going to divide the consumer base. It's not going to change how games are made for the PlayStation 4. There's still going to be PlayStation 4 games. All games that are coming out will be PlayStation 4 compatible. But I wonder how well Sony and all the developers will actually hold themselves to that.
It is an interesting question, and it seems that the console developers are now eyeing the way that platforms evolve on the PC side, where there's sort of gradual evolution and games are released with incrementally more demanding specs. So there isn't just, you don't wait 10 years and find there's a brand new type of PC out. You're always getting slightly better stuff every time you upgrade. And I think the console manufacturers are trying to do something similar. So presumably having a PS4 Pro, is that the official name?
Yeah, I think so.
Presumably that should be kind of like having a really fast PC, so maybe the animation's a little smoother, maybe it's a little more suited for VR, like you were saying. But yeah, there is that question. Is some developer going to say, you know what, we're really vain about our fifth-person shooter that takes place 3 different periods of time simultaneously, 9 different characters in VR, and we just don't want it to look ugly, so we're not going to support it on the regular PS4. Which in turn raises another question. I wonder if developers are constrained, in the way that developers writing stuff for Apple TV had to support the controller. I wonder if developers are constrained to make their games compatible by some standard with the older hardware.
Yeah, I wonder. There's a little bit of precedent for this. Having a new console that is sort of new, sort of not. I actually do have a new Nintendo 3DS. Now, the Nintendo 3DS is actually a bit long in the tooth. It's been around for, wow, actually, let me just do a quick Google on this because I can't remember when the Nintendo 3DS was launched. I want to say 6 years ago, 7 years ago, something like that. Does that sound about right?
It feels right, yeah.
No, well, actually, no, not 6, 7 years ago. Actually, it was launched in 2011. So it was introduced in 2010, launched in 2011. So it's actually 5 years. But they do have the Nintendo 3DS, which is still their current device. But a lot of people have since moved on to what is ostensibly a different console with a new Nintendo 3DS that has a slightly faster processor, in addition to the bigger screens and the 3D facial tracking camera that's on there. So it's a little bit different. And I was wondering if maybe Sony was hoping for something like that. Oh, you've got a device that is more powerful, and it's, well, with the 3DS, it hasn't exactly divided up the consumer base because all the games, save Xenogears or Xenoblade, are compatible all across the Nintendo 3DS line.
Well, as long as that ends up being the case, then there's no harm done, and it will give us a evolutionary development of games on the console side. So we might see some benefits from the standpoint of liking games that look cooler.
Yeah.
You do bring up a good point, though, is that there always has been, to some extent, incremental development of consoles, even if it were just additions that were a little smaller. Or I remember when I bought my Xbox 360 way back when, I was very careful to get a certain make of it because some had really loud fan noise and would melt down, and others were slightly quieter, and I had to really be very careful when I bought it to make sure I got the exact right kind. So there's always been little tweaks to the lineups, but this is the first, I guess it's the first named increment where the platform has a completely different branding.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, besides that, there have been in the previous decade manufacturers that have been adding on to their devices. So the memory expansion on the Nintendo 64, you would have games that would have specific modes that would require the memory expansion, or you get a slightly better frame rate in Diddy Kong Racing if you've got the memory expansion on the N64 versus not. There's a question on the chat, our new YouTube chat, which should be working just now. It seems like it's working. Matt Miller is asking, will it be a difference of higher frame rate on the Pro? I'm not sure. The thing that I've heard is that it's going to be largely a resolution difference. So we're definitely in the world of HD resolutions for all of our video games these days. But often before it gets upscaled to either 1080p or 720p, often the game is actually rendered at a slightly lower resolution. So I can't remember which Call of Duty it was. It looks pretty good. It looks HD. But I remember hearing that the output video was actually rendered at 640 lines, and then it would be upscaled up to either 720 or 1080. So I imagine, and a lot of other people have speculated, that's largely going to be a resolution difference if you play a game on the PlayStation 4 versus the PlayStation Pro. On the PlayStation Pro, you might have a real 1080p with no scaling, and on the PlayStation 4 non-Pro, it might be something like 900 lines, 900p resolution that is then upscaled to 1080p.
Dare we hope that there might be some improvement on the audio side, other than those which might be a side effect of having a more powerful processor?
I wonder about that. You can ostensibly do audio acceleration on the video card. AMD's APUs, algorithmic processing units, they're general algorithmic processing units. They're not dedicated video processing units. So, hey, use it for audio. Why don't you? But I haven't really heard that much about guys really putting it through their audio paces. Going back to a few weeks ago at Game SoundCon, I was actually wondering if there would be a whole lot of discussion about audio acceleration. That seems like it could be a topic that's going to be broached by a lot of people, especially with the importance of 3D localization of audio and having audio really accurate for VR purposes. But I actually didn't hear too much. During Game SoundCon, there was just one AMD sponsored session that seemed to be sort of a quick overview session and nothing else on that front. And I'm hoping that maybe in the future, perhaps this year's Game Developers Conference, we'll hear a bit more about accelerated audio possibilities.
One might wonder that if existing games that do dynamic resource management might automatically improve on the audio side when played on the PS4 Pro, just because they can run more voices simultaneously or any number of things that are kind of managed on the fly. So I wonder if there might just be a magical improvement where suddenly we'll hear more birds tweeting or ambient gunfire or whatever.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Just, yeah, upping the polyphony so you don't get any cutout of voices because now you've got 200 voices max as opposed to 100, or maybe increasing the max radius of various sounds so that it has an even smoother fall off as opposed to hearing it abruptly cut out when it's just beyond your distance. Yeah, that is definitely a possibility. Perhaps that is something that can be easily done, something trivially done.
You look like you're looking at questions from our chat room.
I am. A couple of guys are mentioning, yeah, Chase mentions that he didn't really hear too much about audio acceleration. Sean is talking about how it looks like it's the same amount of memory, but yeah, the speed is a little bit better. There's better, higher memory bandwidth. So maybe it's not a huge difference. It's not going to be the N64 versus N64 with memory expansion difference. It's just going to be a little bit here, a little bit there. In which case, is that really $100 difference? Because right now the PlayStation 4 is retailing for just under $300, and I think the PlayStation 4 Pro is going to be $400. Do you already have a PlayStation 4?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, planning on getting a Pro?
I'd have to see the argument for it, and I suspect that VR is the intended use case just because, as you were saying, there's so many more resource-intensive games. But since I'm not even convinced yet of the viability of any particular VR platform, I'm obviously not going to just slap down extra money for a slightly enhanced experience of what I'm playing now.
Yeah.
But we'll see. Once the guinea pig generation gets their hands on it, we'll see if there's any practical difference.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm looking forward to getting my hands on it as well. I haven't tried a PlayStation 4 Pro yet, and even though I decided last week not to just jump in and buy a PlayStation VR, I did get a chance to try it out. Just this last weekend was a little game conference called Indiecade. It happens every year, and this time around, it moved just a few miles east from its original Culver City location to downtown Los Angeles, taking up its residence at the campus of University of Southern California. And I had a pretty fun time there checking out various games, including a bunch of VR games. So I got to try out some things on Vive, on the Oculus, and the PlayStation VR. And it was pretty cool checking some of those things out. Have you been to Indiecade before? I actually didn't see you this weekend, but I want to say that you've been to Indiecade before, right?
I have not, so I'd be interested in learning a little bit about it. And I think members of our readership who aren't familiar with it in a general way might want to hear a bit about kind of a big picture description.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, well, first of all, you should go to Indiecade. It looks like a couple of guys on the chat were saying, yeah, Indiecade was a blast. Chase said, Saturday was so much fun, and I'm sorry I missed you. I couldn't go to Indiecade on Saturday because I had a wedding to go to, but I was there on Friday and Sunday, and I thought it was actually pretty worthwhile, a pretty fun time. So I guess starting off with the basics, Indiecade has been around for a while now. It's been 7 years. It started out as just a very, very small gathering of independent game developers hanging out in Culver City, showing off stuff. And now it's become a rather large affair. So it went from a few dozen people to now really it's more like a few hundred people. It's not a game developers conference. It's not even quite a game sound con, but it's also a very different, very diverse audience of game developers. Lots and lots of game developers that are developing lots of weird stuff. If you're familiar with indie games, you know that they can really run the gamut in genre. It can go all over the place when it comes to mechanics, stories. At this particular Indiecade, I got a chance to play a whole bunch of games that had lots of different mechanics, partly because of the new world of VR, and partly because people were doing really crazy things. Probably the most memorable game was a strategy game that was played with a sewing machine and a Raspberry Pi. It's
Wow.
it, it's really cool. It's a game called Thread Steading, and there's actually a quilting machine somewhere in Pittsburgh that was originally made for this game, where you play a strategy game traversing across a hex board and you just quilt your way across the board. Then they made a smaller version that works with a sewing machine, and you had people playing with these two sewing machines throughout the weekend, and it was really cool. It was actually really amazing to see the really cool weird interfaces that people can play with. And it was also really cool to see how well the hex board just held up with the crisscrossing stitching through the fabric. It was really amazing. Lots of games, many games made by really diverse developers, coming from Europe, coming from Asia, and lots of different genres that are trying to do a lot of different things. Many of these games are not intended to reach wide audiences. So, ga- games that are ostensibly to teach about specific things that happen in history, games that are trying to tell you a little bit about this is the life of a Chicagoan. The games that are about understanding more about how to traverse beyond three-dimensional space. Uh, just lots of different types of games, and also being able to talk to all of those game developers that are trying to do different things that you just don't see in mainstream games, that you just don't see at a GameSpot.
It sounds like there's some philosophical overlap with the experimental game workshop at GDC and maybe the alt input exhibition at GDC as well, where they show a series of games that are unified by having weird controllers. It
Yeah.
sounds like there's probably some people involved common to both of those.
Yeah, there are. Actually, I want to say actually that the sewing machine was there at Experimental Games Workshop last year. But yeah, there is typically a lot of overlap there. If you've seen stuff at the Experimental Game Workshop at GDC, it's pretty great, and many of those things do show up at Indiecade. Experimental Game Workshop is actually one of those ridiculously packed events at GDC. It's typically 3 to 4 hours long, taking up what is it? It's usually the afternoon of the last day of GDC,
Right.
and you're just bombarded with, oh my god, this is all the crazy stuff that people do. Hey, you want a game about time traveling? We're going to really deal with time traveling, or dealing with alternate interfaces, alternate ways of actually doing storytelling. It's really cool. But that's only 3 4 hours. Over at Indiecade, it was actually a very long weekend. Stuff started on Thursday and then ended with an awards ceremony on Sunday. So there's a whole lot of stuff to check out during that big 4-day weekend.
And am I correct in remembering that you were a panelist at a talk at the Decade?
Yeah, I actually did a little talk with a couple of fellow music colleagues. One of them was Nate Chambers, who is a music composer who's probably most known for doing music for the Wadget Eye games. Those are, sort of point and click hidden object type games. And then also another composer, a local guy, Rich Vreeland, who is kind of a game composer, but it's also gotten some notoriety outside of games. He was, let's see, he did the soundtrack for Fez, and most recently did the soundtrack for Hyper Light Drifter. But then he also did a film soundtrack, the horror soundtrack for the movie It Follows. So us three were in front of a bunch of guys just talking about our experiences and mostly agreeing with each other and sometimes not. But it's always fun just talking about all the different ways that one can make it in the game music world, because there are a whole lot of ways to do it, which is rather apt when you see all the different ways that game developers are doing it, especially at a place like Indiecade.
I assume that was the focus of the panel.
Oh yeah, yeah. We were talking about the different ways that we got into the industry, our different approaches to things. So we just all have very different relationships with the developers that we work with. I'm over at that game company, and I've been there for the last 5 years, and I have a very different relationship with music, with game developers. Rich has been working on lots of projects. Nate has been has been working on lots of projects. Just talking about how one navigates those different types of relationships and what works, what can work. How one can approach different types of game developers, because the different personalities that we've worked with over the years are, they just really run the gamut. I, over here at that game company, I work with this guy, Genova Chen, who is a very strong personality and who I've gotten to build not just a rapport with, but a really strong friendship with. And the way I write music for him and with him is very different from the way that I would write music for another game developer. And we were expounding on those different ways. And Rich also had his thoughts on that, and Nate had his thoughts on that as well. It's really a tough thing, though, because all those different game developers, they work in so many different structures, so many different business structures beyond just the structure of the game itself. I think because a lot of us are lovers of video games, we think a lot about what the game design wants or about what the game genre wants. And often that's rather different from what the individual wants. And we sometimes forget that in this music client relationship, you're writing music for the music client, not for the actual game. And keeping that in mind can be really helpful. Sometimes it's easy to lose sight of that.
It does remind me of something I think Danny Elfman once said. In his case, he was working with filmmakers, but he said every filmmaker is a code that needs to be cracked. Meaning, if you're dealing with a client, one of the first things you need to do, especially with a new client, is learn something about their musical, I don't want to say eccentricities, but their personality, their preferences. So you're figuring out what are the constraints that you're working with. And the sooner you can figure those out, the easier of a time you have, to be sure. But it does sound like it was a useful panel. Did you, were there any memorable moments from the Q&A?
Wow. There were some pretty good moments, although I got to admit, right now, the only things that I'm remembering are the really tough problems. The ones where I actually didn't have a very good answer for. So let's see. I mean, I might as well just put it out there. But one of the people that came up after the panel was talking about, hey, I'm starting up this. We have actually a development group over at this college. We don't really have a games program. We certainly don't have a sound program, but we have these sound designers, and we want to have a strong working relationship with all the other people that are in this game development group that we've got here. how can we actually work that out? And she was telling me all about the details, and I'm thinking about the details, and I'm trying to apply different structures to it. And I realized I don't have a good answer. And the thing that I just told her, hey, just email me and I'll try to help you out step by step as soon as I see those steps in front of me. It was actually rather easy during the session saying, hey, this is what I did. This is what I did. Isn't this great? And then afterwards, people talk about their own specific experiences. And I realized, whoa, that is a tough situation. You could do this, you could do this, but is that really the perfect way to do it? Well, let's think about it. Maybe you should try it, take two and call me in the morning, something like that. There's a lot of different ways to get into this game audio world. It can be really tough.
I think one of the challenges in giving advice to newcomers is that a newcomer just wants a lot of specific steps that they can use to move their career forward. Give me that special email address that I can send my MP3s to that will result in a gig 2 weeks later. And all we have to offer are either autobiographical anecdotes, here's the specific things I did to get my career started, or else broad general tips like be good at networking. And really what a beginner wants is something really concrete and specific to their situation. And of course, we can't really, short of sitting down one-on-one and learning a lot about what they're going through, it's hard to give that kind of really satisfying guidance.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to keep on trying to do that. It's really something that I started a few years back, but lately I've been telling people, just email me and you're totally free to chat with me on Google Hangouts, and I will try my best to take a break from work and see if I can actually address what it is you bring up in chat. And actually it's been kind of fun because it gets me out of sometimes these ruts that I get into, these little troughs of, okay, I'm in the middle of music. I got to keep on doing music for the next 4 hours, 8 hours, whatever. And it's cool to see all the different things that people are confronted with, whether it be different sorts of projects. In this particular case, it had to do with the structure of curriculum over at their school and how difficult it was to get resources for video games development. And on top of that, how difficult it is to get sound resources for sound guys in video games there. And how can one keep on going, moving through, making that work? I think that there is a path, and I'm going to try to help those guys over there with that. But I think it's pretty fun. I got to say, it's actually been really good for my mental health to just go ahead and do that, because why not?
It's also nice to feel appreciated. And sometimes when you interact with beginners or newcomers, you are reminded how much you actually know. There's a lot of stuff, this applies to really everyone, but we all have knowledge that we take for granted. And sometimes in providing guidance or taking on a kind of a mentor-ish role, we are reminded that what we already know.
Yeah, agreed. It's easy to forget stuff. It's easy to forget what you haven't forgotten.
By the way, if I'm fighting back laughter, it's not out of mockery. It's because I'm under assault by a hungry cat who is sitting on my lap during this podcast and will occasionally poke his head up. So,
oh man, do you need to feed him? Is it?
Well, he seems to think so, but we have
okay.
a schedule. So if you see like a white tail drifting by the screen, that's the explanation.
I thought it was actually pretty great. Pretty great. Wow, I'm just realizing, has the camera been locked on me this entire time? I'm really sorry about that. Jeez. I think people are smiling in order to actually say that. Yep. Yeah, I think I accidentally locked it on me for the entire half hour. Okay. I think it should be working now. Yes, it works! Oh my God. I am sorry, Mike. That was totally unintentional.
That's fine. I don't mind being delegated to your tiny little familiar near your shoulder, a miniature head, while everyone gets to see you nod or agree or disagree.
Honestly, I wanted to see more of your cat because that, really adds levity to my life, seeing other people's pets.
Well, be careful what you wish for, because you may see an awful lot of him depending on how his whim strikes. He's just below camera threshold right now, but believe me, he's there.
Okay, cool. Well, let's see. Going back to Indiecade, I did want to point out. I mean, it's so hard to go through all the different games there. There were some really interesting games, but I got to at least mention the some of the audio games because there were a couple, and I want to point out one, Soundstage, which is pretty cool, not just from a game perspective, because it's actually not that much of a game. It's more like a musical experience creation application that happens to work in the Vive. So it's a VR thing. If you have a Vive and you have Steam, you can go ahead and download this thing for, I believe, 10 or 15 bucks, something like that. And if you do that, you have access to all sorts of stuff. You got a drum machine, a step sequencer, a modular synthesizer, all sorts of libraries of sound, and you're literally grabbing sounds and plugging them into samplers, and then hooking that sampler up to a sequencer, and then you hit the sequencer, and you're making all sorts of weird sounds in this crazy 3D VR space. It is absolutely ridiculous. Really, really ridiculous, but also incredibly fun when it comes to messing around with synthesis and just having fun with this different input method. And I was reminded a lot of some of the really cool 3D input machines that people were making back in the 90s and 2000s, like the Alesis Air Synth. Any of you guys, let's see, have you messed with that, or do you remember any of those instruments?
I don't personally.
Okay, well, or like a theremin. You know, there is a theremin that you could actually play in there, and you're just waving your hand up in this 3D volume. In some ways, it's actually a lot easier in the VR space because in your headset you could actually see this cube, this volume that your hand actually is going to properly create sounds within, as opposed to the purely invisible volume that is instantiated by the two poles of the theremin. So seeing that and moving your hand there and being able to create sounds, really, really cool.
Do you think that VR offers any practical visualization advantages when it comes to sound synthesis? Once we move past the novelty and the fun and pulling virtual patch cables out of a virtual modular synth, does being able to look at something in 3D or perhaps be surrounded by displays or see a waveform from different perspectives, do you think any of that could be useful?
I think it could. I keep on going back to synthesis because it seems to be one of those areas where people struggle with conceptualizing how sounds are actually modulated and constructed. And being able to work with them in a real, not physical, but easily understood way in 3D space, I thought was actually kind of inspiring. Just, okay, I'm plugging in these modular synths. Okay, there's my control voltage, there's my filter. It works pretty well, and it helped my brain wrap my head around the sound that I was making in a way that was actually sometimes pretty difficult with other modular synths that I had sat down in front of. And I think other people have intimated similar things to me.
I wonder if similar, call it didactic advantages, might be conferred to other aspects of audio. Like one thing that's hard for beginners is learning how compression works and really being able to visualize the effects in a waveform of tweaking all the compression parameters. Now, there's nothing stopping people from making a 2D simulation, but I wonder if you could watch a waveform flowing by like a river and had a couple of knobs in the virtual space and you could really see what you were doing. Maybe that would justify a trip to the virtual reality audio lab.
Yeah, I think so. Certainly in the world of compression, I remember I had a hard time thinking of that when I was a young kid. And I can't remember what it was. I want to say it was actually an audio tool that was created by some demo scene folks. So those Euro demo sceners, besides making cool apps that did really cool graphics and sound, they also made many of their own sound tools. And one of them, I remember, had a really cool visualization of what it meant for a wave file to actually be compressed. And I just looked at that and thought, wow, compression makes sense to me. And there's a lot of applications out there that are far more powerful, that are far better sounding, but they didn't really convey what was actually being done to the WAV file in the way that that particular application did. I think that there is a lot still in the world of teaching, and I think that this VR world has a lot of potential there to teach what is going on in sound, where it's so difficult to visualize.
How about mixing? Do you think that having an immersive 3D visualization environment might lend itself to some new views of the mix process?
Ooh, that could be cool. Mixing is hard. And I got to admit, I'm actually not a really good mixer. I like to think that I'm getting better, but perhaps on going on another track, I'm really interested in some of the AI mixing tools that some of these companies are coming out with, because in addition to doing their particular heuristics and processes in order to make mix decisions, it's also conveying to me what those processes actually are. And I'm learning about those decisions by learning about the motivations for those decisions by these AI tools. And I've got to mention Isotope here because they just came out with this thing called Neutron. And that's basically what it is. It is a plugin that you put into your mix on different places. So, hey, I'm going to put Neutron on my lead. I'm going to put Neutron on my drums. I'm going to put Neutron on my strings, my guitar. And I'm also going to tell Neutron, this is what this track is actually comprised of lead, strings, guitar. And it's going to actually make changes. It's going to do changes with EQ, with volume. It's going to make an intelligent decision, or seemingly intelligent decision about that. And most of the time, it's actually going to make a really positive change in the sound for your mix. And I found that I can learn a lot from Neutron. So it's kind of crazy that it's not really visualization, but just conveying the processes themselves and having a little bit of say in how one motivates those processes is creating this feedback loop for me, which I think is making me a better mixer.
Have you been playing around with Neutron?
I have been playing around with it. It's scary because it sounds good. It sounds, I feel like I have something to learn from this piece of software. And I actually wonder what Kyle would say, because maybe he would say, no, you should learn from me, or maybe I should just send my projects off to him for him to mix. But Neutron, it's, like, quite honestly, Neutron's not going to really be annoyed at me if I put it into a track at 3 o'clock in the morning. I feel like I'm learning something from Neutron, and that's that is real high praise. It's one thing for a piece of software to sound good, and it's another thing for it to actually change your process for the better and actually teach you something. So thank you, Isotope. Besides sponsoring the show, thank you for actually teaching me a little bit about what I can do in order to be a better mixer.
One of the reasons Isotope is a great sponsor is that we actually really love their products, and I think all of us use them on a daily basis. So it's not like we're selling out. We're really just singing the praises of something we were going to praise anyway.
Yeah. So thank you, Isotope. Besides, in sponsoring the show, you really provide us a lot of cool opportunities, besides opportunities to check out your cool software, opportunities to help out the viewers of this show, because as Adriano in the chat room is reminding me, yeah, it's about time for a giveaway. Yeah,
Those are exciting words.
it's giveaway time. Yeah.
Not exciting to us because we're not eligible, but it should be exciting to all of you.
No, this is actually really cool. We are giving away, and I'm going to, just want to share this little picture here. We are going to be giving away a copy of iZotope's Stutter Edit. And Stutter Edit is actually a pretty cool playable instrument where you can do all sorts of different types of effects. So, stuttering effects, as well as sweeping effects, percussive effects, and you can play those effects in a way that's actually really cool for a lot of different types of music. It's great for synths, it's great for EDM, it's also great for making the typical types of sweeps and pad sounds that you're going to get for intense action music, trailer cut music. Stutter Edit is actually a really cool piece of software. And if you want to enter into this giveaway, all you have to do is tweet at us at Game Audio Hour and at iZotope Inc. with the hashtag StutterMe. Hashtag StutterMe. And you will be entered into the drawing, which is going to take place 1 week from today. So check that out. Hashtag StutterMe. And just tweet us at Game Audio Hour, at iZotope Inc. Hopefully in the tweet you have plenty of space to say something really cool about us, like, wow, Vince, your head of hair is actually really not that bald. I can't. Oh, I mean, look at this. Look at this. I'm going to just quickly take off this screen share because look at that. No, I have horrible hair. It's because of these headphones. I blame the headphones, honestly. But seriously, check out Stutter Edit. Get excited about the videos that they have there on iZotope, and go ahead and tweet at us with the hashtag StutterMe, and you too could be entered into the drawing next week.
Now, if I remember, there's a little bit of formatting. There's a little bit of formatting information we have to give with respect to how the tweet is structured, right? Because you want to not put, when you're doing, in addition to including the secret code word and tagging us, I believe you don't want to do either of those things at the very head of your tweet, right? You want to have some text, or am I misremembering that?
Yeah, you are exactly right. You just want to make sure that you don't start off your tweet with either us at Game Audio Hour or at iZotope Inc. So say something cool like, wow, those guys at Game Audio Hour at iZotope Inc. could possibly hashtag StutterMe. So don't start it off with the tweet, with the Twitter username or the hashtag, and then your tweet is going to go through just fine. Right. Put that little witticism at the very beginning before you say at Game Audio Hour and at iZotope.
Right, so do include both those things, just neither of them at the beginning, and then you'll be good to go.
Yep, it should be cool. Get excited for that. We will definitely be drawing next week, and it looks like the guys in the chat room are excited about that too, so very cool. I'm glad that you can be excited. Let's see here. Let's see. We kind of went through a sort of serpentine route. Oh yes, we were at Indiecade. Have I convinced you that Indiecade is worth going to if you are a music composer?
Well, after the show ends, I'm actually going to head down to Culver City and get in line for next year's Indiecade. So I'll bring my laptop, so I'll still be able to participate in the show next week, but that's where I'll be.
Okay. Well, maybe it's a little bit early because they actually still haven't announced the dates for Indiecade. But I think there are some other things that are worth saying. There are a lot of music composers that want to do cool stuff. And I know on this show, we've actually talked quite a bit about how we want to hear different types of music and different types of sound in our video games. Now, in addition to that, we also like to play and see different types of video games. I know that a bunch of people have asked me, hey, I'm a person that likes to do this type of music, which is not your typical mainstream stuff. They're not saying, hey, I like to follow exactly in the steps of Hans Zimmer. I am a dead ringer for Dave Matthews Band. They're not saying stuff like that. They're saying I'm doing this thing. I really like doing things with this particular instrument. I have this particular sound that I've cultivated over the last few years. One of the cool things about Indiecade is, besides playing all these really wacky, weird, diverse games, is meeting and chatting with all these really wacky, weird, diverse people that are trying to do really different things. And in trying to do different things, they're also even more uncertain than is typical in the video game industry of what is the music or sound that should work with that. And so I think there's actually a lot of opportunity for music composers and sound designers to actually find interesting relationships there because the crew is so diverse. It's actually in some ways better than one of those other mantras that we have. Hey, go to game jams. And game jams are really cool. But often game jams, by virtue of having a particular subject or directive, can be a bit limited in the type of music or sound that will be attached to those particular games that come out of the event. With Indiecade, you have all these people that are trying to do weird and wacky, crazy things, and their next thing is going to be even more weird, more wacky, more crazy. And so they're looking for something else there. They're looking to have another relationship out there, a different relationship with the music for their game. And maybe that means creating a new relationship with you as a different game composer, a different sound designer. So that's one of the things that I think makes Indiecade actually really cool for music composers and sound designers that are looking for gigs.
And there's something very liberating about indie games that are not beholden to the musical traditions of a particular genre, because since you're free from all expectations, you have both the excitement and terror of a blank slate. You could really come up with a musical concept, and it could be just about anything as long as it captures the rhythm and pacing and energy of the game and all the basic parameters that we try to model as game composers. But if you happen to like doing something off the beaten path musically, it sounds like it's a great opportunity to try and pitch your specialty, your eccentric specialty that everyone thinks is weird. It might find a home here. I kind of think how, Kyle kind of bemoans that there aren't more opportunities for kind of guitar-based scoring in the game world. And it seems like he should head down to Indiecade, where I'll be waiting for the next 364 years, days. Order of magnitude problem. He should head down there and see if he can find someone willing to buy what he's selling. Because I think there are a lot of opportunities when you've got a huge collection of instruments like Kyle does to see what you can do with them once you're free from the limitations of narrowly defined musical genres.
Yeah, totally agreed. It was actually really cool chatting with some of the other music composers and sound designers that were there. Some of them were really quite new. Some of them were established, like Rich. Actually, Rich, he was talking about how he started out as primarily a guitarist, and many of his soundtracks were pretty much guitar. And he was using guitar tabs to create most of the scores for his very early video games. So that was actually kind of cool. Hey, you're actually defining a sound effects using guitar tab software. That's really wacky. But man, it is actually really cool talking to those music composers and sound designers, because you realize they're all pretty different too. They're not trying to sell you on, hey, I make super awesome stuff that sounds just like Hans Zimmer or Michael Giacchino or something like that. They're really passionate about the work that's coming out of Indiecade there that is really crazy. Hey, this is a children's fairy tale, or this is the sound of 1917. This is the sound of this crazy four-dimensional world. And you can see all the different things that happen there. And it's amazing the possibilities that come up in your brain when you're playing all those games. Sometimes I have weekends where I play lots of PlayStation 4 or just hang out on my PC trying to go through my Steam library, and I'll have game ideas, and those game ideas are going to be very much related to the games that I'm playing there. Hey, I'm going through these flight sims. I've got flight sim ideas in my head. But with Indiecade, oh man, all these games are making me think of new input mechanisms, new ideas for genre, and that is setting off my music ideas in a totally different direction, and that's really exciting.
Huh. Was there any audio specific programming or events in addition to your panel this year?
Not so much. There actually used to be a little bit more in terms of audio panels, but this year there were two audio panels. One was, oh no, I'm just blanking on his name. Oh, darn it. One was a Unity audio panel that was happening on Thursday. We did the music composers panel on Sunday. The panels actually really run the gamut because it's not just focused on, hey, here's the game world, here's an interview with some people. They like to have some different focuses throughout these years. This particular year, they did a big focus on mental health. They had a couple of talks from this one doctor psychiatrist from Australia talking about the importance of mental health. They had a panel on Sunday morning that was talking about how game developers use game development itself as a coping mechanism for their mental issues. There was a lot of focus on mental health at this particular Indiecade, and I thought that was actually really cool. It's something that I had actually thought of as being relevant, not just for myself, but for other people that I come across who are working on projects for 3 years, 4 years, and there's a big struggle, a big tension that just arises from the development cycles of video games.
Interesting. And I imagine they addressed the psychological stresses of the freelance life as well.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, there's the difficulty of trying to get the next gig, and how does one manage actually multiple gigs. Yeah, this was actually mostly from that actually wasn't a music composer. That was another developer that does quick quick app development for large companies. So it'd be like, oh, here's a game that's a promotional game for he mentioned Gillette. So yeah, Gillette. Hey, well, I got to do this, and I've got to do this really quickly, and hopefully they like it enough that they'll do another 2-month gig for me. But yeah, that can be really tough. It's a really tough life to deal with. And they talked very openly, very earnestly about how they managed it, what their support structures were like for that. Who do they actually work with? Do they work with a therapist? Do they work with other game developers in order to help relieve some of that stress? It was actually really cool hearing this focus on mental health at this year's Indiecade.
I imagine that although mental health stresses happen at every level of the game industry, audio people and perhaps music people in particular have an extra vulnerability, because when you're a composer, your emotional state can directly impact what you're doing. And I mean this in a more specific way than the general sense that everyone's creative in some way and everyone can be stressed out and everyone can suffer a performance hit when there's a big deadline or you're feeling stressed. But what composers do, there's an element of voodoo where you're just tapping into your emotional associations and letting those associations guide your decision making, usually unconsciously. And I find that it's taken me a long time to develop some safeguards against stress so I can preserve that kind of association where ideas relate to musical ideas. I can keep the flow of creativity going. And again, I'm not trying to say that people outside of music don't face that. They absolutely do. But I think those of us who do music face a little bit extra of a performance hit, potentially, because of stress. So that is a really interesting topic, and it's great that they addressed it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think yeah, for me as a musician, I definitely think a lot about making sure that not just consciously but subconsciously I am working well. My inner workings are well oiled in order to make sure that the music flows out in a real good, real positive way. And that can be really tough. Sometimes it's work that does it. Sometimes it's the personal life, and being able to manage that is a is a tough thing to deal with sometimes. Work and personal life, the game development life and personal life can be really tough to manage. It was interesting hearing at yet another panel talking about how people identify themselves as game developers. And I thought about that as well, how sometimes I see myself on a day-to-day basis. How much am I valuing myself as a music composer versus as Val's fiance, or as a son for my mom and dad, and what are my responsibilities, and how exactly do I actually lay that out? And sometimes I actually have to address that head on in order to make sure that, oh, now that I got that squared away, all right, now the music composer can work well again.
Which of those roles is on your email signature?
Oh my God, it's true. I've been the audio director at that game company for a while, and it's like, oh, bam, that's what people care about, right? When they're emailing me, or at least that's what I'm assuming, and maybe that's not really the right assumption, especially since friends do use that email. They don't care about me as an audio director. They care about me. So, it's a fun thing to wrestle with, and at least in wrestling with it, you come to grips, you start to get a little bit better, as opposed to just ignoring it or taking it for granted that, oh, of course, this is what I do. I'm working in the games industry. I'm working as a music composer. I'm just going to go about this.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm intrigued, and I think we should plagiarize this topic for a future episode of Game Audio Hour, because I think it is a really good subject. And if we bring Kyle aboard, we'd have a third set of ideas and perspectives on it. And it might be fun just to do our own take.
I think it would be cool. I mean, especially since all three of us have very different working relationships with our clients and with the game industry as a whole. It would be, and we're also all three of us are in pretty different places in our lives. I mean, Kyle's got, his wife and kid, and, it's, I think it would be very interesting to see the whole crew come together and tackle on this topic for a future episode.
Hmm.
Yeah. Let's see, just going through the chat right now. Some people talking about, oh, there's a little branch here. Matt Miller was talking about Hoptwork virtual pipe organ. It's pretty hardcore, kind of like piano tech. I found this looking for portative organ samples. Have you heard of that, Mike?
I haven't. Although, is it pronounced portative or portative?
Portative. Oh, okay, I'll go with portative organ samples. I think that's right. But
It's
yeah,
a medieval thing, right? That was kind of the type of
yes,
organ.
yeah. So helped work virtual pipe organ, and Matt Miller is definitely singing its praises. It's sample based, but it also uses physical modeling. So that actually sounds really promising. I'm going to check that out. Um, cool. And just want to say thank you to the chatties, because we survived an entire episode without the chat actually being interrupted. That's
That's
exciting.
true.
Yeah.
I had to turn off the chat because I think I was getting a YouTube echo at the beginning of the episode. So I apologize for the chatties for my non-presence, but I'm glad that it was a bustling hive of activity.
Yeah. I think this was really cool. So I think we're going to try sticking with this from now on. I see some yays in the chat. That's cool. Um, But hey, it's been an hour, and hopefully next week we can try some more topics about game audio, maybe with our fearless leader Kyle this time around. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about mental health. Maybe we'll talk even more about all these other things that are happening in the game audio world. So yeah, thank you, Mike. Thank you, chatties. Thank you to everyone else out there. Thank you, Isotope. Make sure to like us on Facebook, to follow us on Twitter. And don't forget, I'll go ahead and end on this because, just so that you remember, don't forget to go into the Isotope giveaway for next week. We are giving away Stutter Edit. All you have to do is tweet at us, Game Audio Hour, and at Isotope Inc., and hashtag StutterMe. So there's your reminder. Game Audio Hour 116. I think this was pretty good, right?
It was indeed. We had a good time. And we will see you all and hopefully more people next week.
Okay, cool. See you guys. Bye.